Welcome to the She Wins podcast. This is your host, Heather Sumlin, and I'm so excited to have Barbara Currier with us today. Barbara is a mental management certified coach. I met her about 8 years ago when she was struggling with her mental game. She came to me to work individually, but she had a really rough journey starting off. So we talk a little bit more about her personal life than we do about her dog handling, but I hope that it's going to provide you some clarity, some things to look forward to, a way to maybe look at the difficulties in life from a new perspective. Barbara, thank you so much for joining me today on the She Wins podcast. Thank you for being a guest.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited. This is the third time that I've interviewed you on something, and then we've worked together. Oh gosh, how many seminars and webinars do you think we've done? I don't even know.
I've lost count, but we've been working together and friends now for like 8 years. So
it's a lot of fun. I love working with Barbara because she's always has such a positive attitude. She's always just honestly so much fun to be around. But has it always been that way for you, Barbara? What was it that ignited maybe this positive energy that you have today? And how might that have been different from when you were growing up?
So no, actually, I haven't always been a positive person. My natural personality is actually, I have a lot of anxiety. I tend to be a doomsdayer. I'm always expecting the worst to happen so that I won't be disappointed. I suffered with a lot of depression growing up. I was raised in an abusive household. My father was physically, verbally, and emotionally abusive. My mom was an utter saint. So the environment that I grew up in was kind of, there was a lot of trauma and turmoil. So I had a lot of mental health issues growing up. And I also was born with 3 fingers on both hands and shorter arms. So I had my very first surgery when I was a day old. And then I had surgeries on my hands and my arms going all the way up until I was 7. So I kind of went through a lot. And I think because of all of the trauma that, I kind of grew up around and, I had having a lot of surgeries at an early age. And there was I think my body was always kind of on hyper awareness and hyper focused for the next possible attack, I guess you could say. I did suffer with a lot of depression. It got really bad in high school, and I started to have some suicidal tendencies and also eating disorder, which usually kind of goes hand in hand. I was basically like an after school special. So kind of what it comes down to.
Oh my gosh.
So I got help. I was seeing a psychiatrist like twice a week when I was in high school, and they wanted to put me on medication, and I really was leery of that because I did, medication has this stigma of, like making you a zombie and making you emotionless. And so I also had this thought of, well, I need to learn to control it myself. I need to learn to have control over my feelings and deal with everything myself, because if I have to depend on medication, then am I actually, learning anything? So I fought with it for years and years and years and years and years, and had ups and downs. I went off to college and met my husband and got married. And when we were married, and then we were married for about 6 to 8 months, and then we ended up moving to Virginia. And we moved away from where I had lived my entire life. And I think that was a huge trigger for me because I suddenly went to completely unfamiliar. And so then I kind of started having some agoraphobia issues and couldn't leave the house unless I had my husband with me or one of my dogs. And it was just getting bad. Like I wasn't living anymore. I was just existing. And I was having night terrors, and I would have panic attacks over literally nothing. Like I remember at one of my all-time worst, sitting on the floor in the bathroom at our house in Virginia and having a complete panic attack because my husband and I were leaving to go hiking. And what if we came across a bear while we were out hiking?
Like, what if there's a bear?
What if there was a bear? That was it. Full blown, on the ground, crying hysterically. What if there was a bear? And I was just like, my God, like, this is not living. This can't be normal. This can't be my life. And so I had a friend in Virginia that was one of the most strong, independent women I think I've ever met. There's nothing she can't do. And so her and I got really close, and I kind of modeled off of her a lot. And, if Paige can do this, I can do this. And, she was kind of a role model for me in that sense. And, I might have made some strides, but still, I always felt like I was battling with myself. And I never felt good enough. I never felt worthy of anything. I had trust issues. I obviously had daddy issues. There was just so much. And so when we moved to Georgia a few years later, my husband was like, maybe you should start seeing somebody again. And yeah, I think that's probably a good idea. So I found a therapist down here. And my very first appointment with her, she said, have you ever tried medication? And I was like, no. I don't want to go on medication. I don't want to, I need to learn how to deal with this myself. And she said, but if your brain chemistry doesn't function normally, she said, no matter how much work you do and how hard you try, you're always fighting a battle. She's like, if you were sick, you would take medication.
Absolutely.
If you were physically ill, you would take medication. So why aren't you willing to do this to help your body if there's something wrong with you? And I was like, well, I never thought about it that way. And so I said, okay, she's like, we can try different ones. We'll put you on the lowest doses. And so I said to my husband, okay, you need to tell me if I'm not me. And he was like, okay. He's like, I can do that. And I was like, if I don't want to be a zombie, I don't, I want to just not be so feeling like I was at war all the time with myself. So I went on Zoloft, and the craziest thing is usually when you go on these medications, it takes a few weeks, sometimes months before you see any difference. Mine was 48 hours.
Wow.
48 hours. And the night terrors were gone. The panic attacks were subsiding. I was like me, but me without all of the massive anxiety. And it felt like I could actually breathe again. And it was crazy because I had fought it for so many years. And this one small, tiny pill changed my life. And I've been on Zoloft now for 15 years. We just recently upped my dose for the first time in 14 years. I still get panic attacks once in a while. If there's a lot of stress going on in my life, they will come out. When I retired from agility 2 years ago, that was a huge rough patch for me. There was a lot of depression. And so the panic attacks came back out in that again. But usually once things kind of settle down, they'll go away. But I'm not the doomsdayer, always looking for the worst person that I was. But the other thing that I had to do was learn to retrain my brain. And which I learned from working with you and working with your dad, that, I could change that tape in my head. It didn't have to always be the worst case scenario. And it didn't have to be that tape in my head that told me I wasn't good enough and that, or, I didn't matter, or I wasn't worthy. I could shut all that down. And did it take time? Yes. So now when I feel myself getting anxious about things, I ask myself, is this something that we can control? And if it's not, then I say, okay, well, then let's just wait and worry about it when we actually have something to worry about. And, and then from there, we'll figure out solutions. But I've gotten so much better now about not letting myself get wound up. And it's really funny because now when things are happening, with my, like, with the house or with my husband and I. And I'm like, well, let's wait till we have more information before we get ourselves worked up about this. And he's like, whose wife are you? Because he was always the grounding, calm one. And I was always the one that was wildly spinning out of control. And now I'm all like Zen-like. And
I love it. It's interesting to me. It sounds like there were two really defining moments that you're talking about. One is recognizing and realizing that maybe you needed more than what you had thought that you needed, which was saying yes to medicine when your mind had told you that that was a bad idea your whole life.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that, because I have known so many people who it seems like such a simple solution. And for some people it works. For some people it's not the right answer. But for you, it definitely was. So recognizing that and choosing to take that step. And then the other thing is recognizing that mental management is something coupled with your medication and your counseling that actually made such a huge difference. But you didn't come to us for, everyday life situations. You came to us for dog sports. So tell me, tell me what led you to like how we met. Do you remember what led you to make the phone call?
Well, yeah, it's kind of one of those also life-changing moments. So I had just started competing my miniature poodle Miso and in agility, dog agility. For people that don't know what dog agility is, it's an obstacle course, basically race that you do with your dogs. So I've done that for 25 years and competed at a very high level. And about 8 years ago, I came out with my young dog, Miso, miniature poodle, and she came from fairly famous agility lines. Most of her siblings and parents had been world team dogs and very successful. And so there was a lot of people watching what I was going to do with this little dog. And she had bucket loads of talent and was incredibly fast. And so I had always had a strong mental game. I grew up doing show jumping with horses. I started riding when I was 4 and competed all the way up into my early 20s when my body started to give out, and also did that at a very high level, starting at a pretty young age. So I always had a pretty strong mental game, but something was happening when I was coming out with Miso. I felt like everybody was watching me. Everybody was judging me. I felt like everyone was videoing my runs, and most of it was probably in my head. It probably wasn't actually happening that way. But it felt real to me. And so I was finding that when I was going into the ring with her, I felt like I was going to have a panic attack. And she is a very sensitive dog. She loves to work and she's very solid and she will work through anything except me being weird. She's very, very sensitive to me. And she wasn't wanting to sit at the start line. She was trying to leave the ring. And I knew that it was me because I was feeling like I was going to black out. I felt like I was going to be sick. And that was not normally how I was. And it was about 2 trials that this happened in. And I am a very, very solution-based person. I cannot stand excuses. I don't know if it's from being born with 3 fingers and short arms and having to learn how to do things differently and being told by tons of people that I wouldn't be able to do things because of that. I am not an excuse person. And so when something is going wrong, I immediately want to find solutions. What do I need to do to fix this? What needs to be done? So I came home and was telling my husband that I was looking into a sports psychologist because something was going on. And he said, oh, you should read this book With Winning in Mind by Lanny Basham. He's an Olympic rifle shooter. And my husband did competitive shooting at the time. So Lanny's very well known in his world. And so I said, all right. So I read the book and I really liked what I read. But I am also kind of self-centered. And so I really wanted it about me and my sport and what I was going through. So I went to the website and was looking to see if I could work with Lanny. And when I was scrolling through the website, I saw that Lanny's daughter, was a coach. And I went, oh, I would really like to work with a female. Yeah. And I saw that you had done some dog sport stuff. And so I was like, okay. So I called you and we started working together. And thankfully, because I'd always kind of had a pretty strong mental game and I didn't let it go on very long, I didn't have a lot of bad habits for us to break through. But so it got me back on track pretty quickly. What I didn't expect to happen was for it to be as life-changing for me as it was, in just teaching me, like, I view the world differently. I view life differently. My interactions with people are different. And 8 years later, I would become a certified coach myself because I'm so passionate about the system and what it does for you, not only in sports, but for in life. I firmly believe that when I retired from agility that 2 years ago and was going through my massive depression, that the tools that I learned through mental management and you and Lanny are huge reasons that I made it out the other side and am happy and strong and feel like I have a new purpose. Because I think without you guys, that 2 years probably would have gone on a lot longer because I was really struggling through that.
I could see people listening to this not knowing you and wondering, well, if you were struggling so much with your mental health for so long, how can you say you had a strong mental game? And so I want to make some basically clarify the difference between mental health and mental game. Because for you, you're like, in competition, you had a really strong mental game. Can you explain the difference between the two? Just for those who might be like, well, but wait, she said that she was struggled all, her life until she found, these solutions. And so can you give a little clarity there?
Yeah, that's fair. That's a fair question. So when I'm in competition, and the bigger the competition, the more I thrive. I love pressure because for whatever my chosen sport is, whether it's horses or dogs, I work very, very hard, and I was very, very good at both. So when I was in my element, I didn't question my ability. I didn't question my teammates' ability, whether it was my horse or my dog. I always felt like we had put in the work and that we deserved to be there. So when I'm in that pressure situation, I thrive. But take me out of that situation, basically when it's just me. And honestly, it might have something to do with the animal. The animal is the connection for me. The animal is the grounder. The animal almost, I don't know, maybe they ground me, maybe they give me the confidence. I don't know.
Well, maybe you want to perform well for them. And so it takes your performance like in a whole different context.
Like, that probably is a huge thing, because I will say the 3 times that I tried to take my life, one of the main things that was stopping me was what would happen to my animals. Because at the time I had a dog and a cat and a horse, and nobody in the family really cared for them except me. And that was always like the forethought in my mind of, because I didn't care about me. And there was some anger towards my father. And so it was, my father made it very clear that he didn't love me and that I was not because of my arms. And he told this to me on many, many occasions. And so part of me wanting to take my life was almost a vengeance. Like, I'm going to take my life because of you, and you need to live with that, because he had hurt me so badly. But in the back of my head, it was always, what will happen to my animals? So I do think that is a huge thing for me, is I never want to let my animal teammate down. So I'm always going to give them 100% of me, the best of me. I always want to feel like I'm holding up my end of the team. But when it's just me on my own, then I was just flailing, drowning out in the middle of sea.
It's interesting to me. There's such a problem right now with people who are stuck really in that headspace. And I'm not a therapist. I don't claim to be. I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist. I don't claim to be. I'm a mental coach and an interview coach, and I stay in that lane. But having you talk about, the attempts on your life and the times when you wanted to end it, it makes me wonder what advice you have to someone who has been struggling in that way.
Don't give up. Even when you feel like you don't have the strength to take one more breath, just take one more breath. And that's all you got to do. The hardest days, I promise, they don't last forever. And I am not a therapist. I am not a psychiatrist, but I am somebody that has lived this, has been at the bottom of the hole and just wanted it to end. And I've dragged myself out of it. And there is light. It's not always going to hurt as bad as it does. It's not always going to be this hard, but you just have to hold on. Hold on and ask for help. If I could tell my high school self one thing, it would be take the medication. Because I feel like I lost probably 15 years of a really full quality life because of my inner demons that I was battling. And I think it even impeded the work that I was doing with my therapists and my psychiatrists because my brain wasn't functioning normally. I wasn't having regulated dopamine and serotonin and all the things that our brain uses to function properly. My brain wasn't doing it. And so even when I was making progress, I feel like if I had just taken medication earlier, I probably would have made a whole lot more progress. And I know that people struggle because sometimes they do take medication and it doesn't work for them. But there's so many different types out there. If you feel like a zombie, that's not the medication for you. Like you shouldn't feel like that. Like I have all my feelings. I still have rage and guilt and anger and sadness and happiness. And like I have all the feelings that I had before. They're just not manic. And they just like when I have a bad day, because I still have bad days because I'm human, I don't live in it. I can say I had a bad day. Like one of the last times we talked, I had woke up sad that day. Sometimes I just do. I just wake up sad. And I went hiking. And while I was hiking, there was a turtle in the middle of my path. And he was cute and he was out. His legs were out. His head was out. And I sat there and I took pictures of him. And I thought, isn't nature amazing? And I felt like it was, whether it's the universe or God or whatever you believe in, I felt like it put it there in my path to say, you're sad today, but look, here's this cute turtle. This cute turtle is here to make you smile.
I think you're hitting on a really cool point that I just think is really powerful, is that we're really not alone in life.
Yep.
And that a lot of times when we feel the most alone, we're probably the least alone.
Yep.
And we really need to either we need to pray, we need to reach out to those who are around us, we need to recognize that we are not by ourselves and battling alone. And I think it's so incredibly important that people find the resources necessary. And for you, I'm just so grateful that you never followed through you were never successful in ending your life. I'm so incredibly grateful because
me too.
I wouldn't have met you. And I have had some of my best days like hanging out with Barbara, and a little bit of encouragement to people too. One of the reasons why I'm doing this podcast is, Barbara and I could talk all day long about the successful time that she's had and her work in dog sports and all the things that she's done. But I'm so incredibly grateful that she opened up about this journey that she's had that has been a little bit on the dark side. Because sometimes when we look at people who have succeeded at high levels, we make an assumption that they've always been successful, that they've never struggled, because we don't like to talk about the struggle because the struggle's hard. But if we don't talk about our mess, we can't share our message. And I think that's what's so incredibly important, is that you've been able to come on the other side of all this struggle and difficulty, and you're better for it.
Yeah. And it's funny. I wouldn't want to go back and live it again, but I wouldn't change it for anything because I truly believe that it made me the person I am today. It made me the person that wants to help other people, that is empathic to how other people feel, what other people need. And that now, and with being a coach, I feel like I'm really helping change people's lives for the better. And I don't know if I would be this compassionate and this aware of everybody's emotions and everybody's feelings if I hadn't gone through all of the trauma and the struggles that I did. So though I wouldn't want to live it again, I wouldn't change anything about it either, because I think it really truly has made me who I am.
So I have two really they're not quick questions, but they're questions. I don't know how quick they are. Number one, there was a piece of advice that your mom had given you. I feel like your mom, you said, was a saint. What is something that your mom said to you that was beneficial to you even in those hard times? And number two, did you ever forgive your father?
So it's funny that you asked that about my mom, because you sent me over a list of potential questions, and so that I would, not be caught off guard. And one of the questions was a piece of advice that someone gave you. Mm-hmm. And my response literally was my mom. So which I did not send you the answers to those questions. So it's really funny that you ask what piece of advice my mom gave, because that's what I would say. So my mom instilled in me from a very young age that there was nothing I wouldn't be able to do. I just might have to do it a little bit differently. And it didn't matter what it was. I mean, I would be a millionaire for how many times a doctor told me when I was little that I wouldn't be able to do things, or my birth father telling me that I wouldn't be able to do things. My mom, there was never anything that I came to her and said, I want to do this, and she said, you can't. It was okay. And things were hard. My arms were a lot weaker than most people's. And there was a lot of things that were hard to do that I had to learn different ways to do, but she always had my back. She didn't just do things for me, but she was there to support me and root me on. And if that meant I had to climb up on countertops and be a spider monkey to get glasses down, then that's what I did. Or, when it came to horses, there was different ways I had to do stuff, but she was always adamant about, if you want it, you will get it done. Wow. And I think that's one of the reasons that I am so solution-based and so anti-excuses, because excuses are just a cop-out, and they just let your mind go, yep, see, I can't do it. And there's always an answer. You just got to look for it. And sometimes it's a little bit of a journey and a little bit of a hill you got to climb, but man, is it worth it when you get to the top.
I like that Henry Ford quote, like, if you think you can or you think you can't, you're right.
Exactly. So did I ever forgive my father? Well, that's an interesting one. When my parents got divorced when I was 18, and I went to live with my mother, and I cut ties with my father shortly thereafter, and didn't speak to him for, probably 25 years. He did not come to my wedding. He was not invited. My mother remarried, and my stepfather, I actually refer to as my dad. He gave me away at my wedding. He's a wonderful man. He adores me, and I adore him. I'm a daddy's girl. What I always wanted to be growing up. And as an adult, I'm a daddy's girl now. And my birth father reached out to me in an email about 8 or 9 years ago now. And I thought, okay, this is interesting. Maybe he's changed. Maybe he's, grown. Maybe there could be some form of communication. But going back and forth in email, he wouldn't own up to anything. Everything was my fault. And one of his comments was, the one thing I remember about you was how messy you kept your room, and how if there was ever a fire, I was going to die because your room was messy. And I thought, I lived with you for 18 years, and that's your one memory of me. Wow. That's what you remember. And so I thought, you know what? You're still the same toxic person that you were when I was a child, and that intimidated me and scared me and told me that I was worthless and that you didn't love me, and that if something happened to you and my mother, I would go to an orphanage because nobody would want me. Yep, you're that same person, but I'm an adult now, and I get to choose who gets to be in my life. So I choose that you don't get to be in my life, and you don't get to learn and meet the amazing person that I've turned into in spite of you. And so I forgave him for me.
Yes.
I didn't tell him that.
Right.
I just told myself that. Mm-hmm. Because as long as I held on to the anger and the hatred for what he did to me, I continued to give him power over me. And I wasn't willing to do that anymore. I mean, it had caused problems in my marriage because I expected my husband to be like him, and my husband is nothing like him. I had a lot of man issues because of it. And so I thought, you know what? I'm done. I forgive you. And it didn't mean that everything he did to me was okay.
Right.
It meant that I am no longer letting this negativity and hatred that you raised me in dictate my life. And he passed away about 8 years ago. And everyone kept saying to me, when he dies, you're going to regret it. And I didn't. I didn't, because he was my birth father. That's all he was. He wasn't a dad. He wasn't anyone that brought peace or joy or love into my life. And so, no, I didn't. Family doesn't necessarily mean blood and DNA. Family can be chosen. And, who I call my dad now, we don't share a DNA, but he's more of a dad to me than my birth father ever was. So long story short, I forgave for myself, but not for him, and said, I forgive you for everything you did. Go live in peace. No, I didn't do that.
But internally said, I'm going to forgive him so that I can live in peace.
Correct.
And let it go.
Yes. I'm sure it did not haunt him at all. He was a bit of a narcissist, so I'm sure it didn't haunt him at all.
I think what I want people to take away from our conversation is, number one, you have to own your own journey. You can't let other people choose for you how you feel about you.
Yep.
And number two, I just absolutely love this idea that you can really do anything you choose to do, no matter how short your arms are.
No matter how short. And like I've always said, I just think I'm way more energy efficient than you guys are. You got these extra arms, you got these extra fingers, and just weigh you down. So I'm telling you.
Well, thank you so much, Barbara, for joining us. I'm glad that you're energy efficient. I'm glad that you're optimistic and positive now. And I'm glad that you are grateful for the journey you've been through, but wouldn't go through it again. Nope. Like this episode if you do. Join our Patreon membership if you haven't already, and become a Patreon member. We're going to talk to Barbara a little bit more about how she was able to overcome some of the things that she's been through in her life. And we're going to talk a lot more about dog sports for the dog handlers out there. So if you have not joined my Patreon membership, please do, so that you can get all of the juicy things from Barbara. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.